What's up, everybody? Welcome to a quick video today where I want to talk a bit about the European scene. One of the goals in general on the channel here is to also keep you updated of what's going on in the Heroes of the Storm esports scene. And of course, we all know that Prague was a pretty important milestone. It was the road to Blizzcon Final for Europe, and we had two winners there. So Dignitas, formerly known as Bob, and also NaVi will advance to play at Blizzcon and represent Europe there. It was a bit of an upset that Team Liquid wasn't able to make it after they dominated the European scene for months, but we also saw a bit of a tendency of especially NaVi and Bob getting extremely strong, and with Group A having like three of these teams going up against each other, we kind of expected the two teams to come out of Group A also to represent Europe then in North America at the Blizzcon Finals. There's a couple of things though that you might not be aware of, and one of these things is that Blizzard had quite specific rules when it came down to how the teams are allowed to change their lineup going into Prague. And well, they actually had the rule that teams are not allowed to do that. And that basically meant that once you qualified for Prague, once you qualified for the finals, you were not allowed to change out any players. And that's a quite important thing because we're going to talk about that in a second. It also says that all of the teams that have qualified for BlizzCon at Prague are not allowed to change their roster until they play at BlizzCon. Of course, the reason behind that is quite simple. Blizzard wants to have stability. They don't want to run the risk that one of the teams suddenly just like exchanges the entire roster or 4 or 5 players or 3 or 4 or 5 players and then plays at BlizzCon with a completely different lineup, maybe with players even that played on other teams and have been eliminated. So stability is absolutely key here, but it also causes a couple of problems. The Heroes of the Storm seal is still pretty young, and that means that we have a lot of teams just like trying to practice with each other. They're successful for a while, and of course at the beginning when you still have that honeymoon phase and you're winning a lot of tournaments, everything is absolutely fine. But oftentimes on a personal level there are a couple of problems, or you just find out that one of the players' playstyles doesn't really match the team, and after a while, maybe when that honeymoon phase is finally over, teams are starting to just like disband. They start to, for example, like change out 1 or 2 players. And that is something that is just like going on, especially at the beginning of a new game, because there's just like so many things that change. Later on, it's more stable, organization come in, there are contracts, of course the players also quite know each other very well and know how they get along with each other. And in this case right now, we had actually a couple of scenarios where a lot of the teams that went to Prague already knew that if they don't qualify for BlizzCon, they would either disband or change around a few of their players. And the entire rules that Blizzard applied here actually caused also a couple of problems, since a few teams going to Prague already knew that they would probably not be able to play on the top level since they had internal problems. Now that's something that always happens, and of course in this case right now it was maybe a little bit more severe than in others. But the interesting part is that more than half of the teams that went to Prague already decided before they left or were rumored to change out players in case that they don't qualify. And you would actually be quite surprised like which teams were that. We're not going to talk too much into detail here, but we already can mention a few teams where players announced that they're looking for a team. If you're looking at the Pirates in Pyjamas, for example, they more or less disbanded, at least that's what's being said. We have a lot of their players looking for teams right now, already talking to other teams if they maybe find a spot there. And we also have players of Fnatic and also Team Liquid looking for teams right now. So a lot of the teams really changing up their roster here, and that's why we're going to see a lot of changes in the European scene in the near future. Of course, like the big tournaments this year, there's not too much left on the offline level. It's more or less about BlizzCon. So the teams are probably going to take their time to really think about, okay, who do we want to have in our team? They're going to scrim a whole lot. They're going to try new players out, maybe play in a couple of online tournaments with a different lineup, just give it a go and see how things go there. But this is just like one of these things that I want to make sure that you guys are aware of, because there's going to be a lot of changes coming. A lot of the teams are maybe even disbanding, switching around players completely, switching organizations. I actually think like this is less likely, but we are definitely going to see a bit of a shift in the European scene. Everything leading up to the qualifiers for Prague and then Prague itself force the teams to like stay in a certain lineup and also to not risk too much, to not experiment too much with their setups. But right now that they don't have that restriction anymore, they are in a position where they can now suddenly start to strengthen the lineup, because the big goal of course is to put together a team that is able, especially in 2016, but also towards the end of the year, to play on the highest level and win then everything. And that's extremely important. A lot of the players will maybe also switch roles, which is another thing that's going to be very important down the line. And of course, given that we had those experiences, Blizzard also needs to think a bit about how they want to change the setup. I personally actually believe that they are going to change these rules. It was, of course, absolutely understandable that they want to have stability going into tournaments like Prague, not only about the European qualifier, I mean, the same thing also applies to the American one. But I feel like in the future we're going to see a lot of these tournaments that last over several weeks or months loosen up those rules a bit and, for example, allow teams to change out at least one player, which would help in a lot of cases, especially when there's personal issues involved. But it's definitely one of the things that a lot of people don't really talk about when they're mentioning the European finals or any kind of competition that is currently ongoing. So that's definitely one of the things to keep in mind. We're going to see a lot changing in the near future. I'm personally pretty excited about it because I feel like the teams or the European scene will come out of that stronger than ever. But of course, at the beginning, it's probably going to be a little bit, weird, just like seeing players practice with other teams, scrimming, experimenting a little bit, and the lineups change like that. So I just wanted to give you guys a bit of a heads up that a lot of changes are coming. A few of those might be surprising, but I am pretty sure that the European scene will be strengthened by that, and of course also Heroes of the Storm in general as an esports, and I'm pretty excited about it. That's it for today. Just a bit of a heads up. I hope that you guys took something from it. And yeah, if you want to have more videos like that in the future, just let me know. If you have any questions in the comments, feel free to ask them. I might not be able to answer all of those, since a lot of that stuff is, of course, not really public. But yeah, in case that you have any questions, just write a comment over there. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Hope that you enjoyed it. And I'm going to see you next time with more Heroes of the Storm content here on the channel. Have a good one. Bye-bye.